He was a blind millionaire, preparing to marry the woman who stood by him, until a quiet maid whispered, "I can heal your eyes." But as the light slowly returned, so did the lies, and what he saw in the shadows would shatter everything he believed about love, loyalty, and the woman he was about to marry. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The walls of Elias Moreau's mansion were quiet now. Too quiet. Once filled with tech startup buzz, laughter, and the click of innovation at his fingertips, it had become a museum of what once was. The blinds remained drawn, the grand piano gathered dust, and the man who had once stood at the top of Forbes's Tech Titans Under 40 list now sat in silence, staring into a darkness he couldn't escape. He remembered the crash, the way metal screamed, glass shattered, and his entire world was swallowed by blackness. It had been over a year, yet the last thing he truly saw still haunted him, the shimmer of headlights slicing through rain, and the look of panic on the driver's face before impact. Since then, Elias had been blind. He wore it like armor, even if it weighed on him like chains. He wasn't the type to ask for help, not even when help was all he had. That's what Vanessa reminded him of every day. Vanessa Winters, his fiancée, stunning, poised, polished, everything society admired in a woman who stood beside a billionaire. She had been with him before the accident, and to her credit, she hadn't left. But there was a chill in her kindness, a rehearsed quality to every word she offered. She brought him his tea at the same time every morning, asked how he was at the same points in every conversation, tucked him in with the same forced smile in her voice, predictable, controlled, and distant. Procedural treatment is resulted in a profound benefit to your physiotherapy. 2 floors. And Dr. Patel called. He wants to adjust your sleep meds again. Elias nodded, his fingers grazing the armrest of the couch. Thanks. 6. He listened for her breath, but she was already gone. He hated himself for doubting her. After all, she stayed, but sometimes it felt like she was staying for something else. Not him. Maybe the money, maybe the image, maybe the man he used to be. Then came Lina. She arrived like a whisper. No loud knock, no grand entrance. He heard her voice first. It was soft, warm, and curious. "Excuse me, sir. I'm Lina. I'll be helping around the house starting today." He was used to maids being rotated in and out like background noise, but there was something different in how she moved. She didn't make unnecessary sounds. She didn't shuffle awkwardly. She didn't tiptoe either. She simply flowed, gracefully, like she had memorized the space already. "You don't have to call me sir," he said, a little more abruptly than intended. "Of course," she replied. "Would you prefer Elias?" That was new. Most people asked what they should call him. She asked what he preferred. He said slowly, "Elias is fine." Days passed, and he began to look forward to her presence. Not that he saw her, but he felt her society. She didn't walk on eggshells around him. She didn't fill the air with pity. She simply asked, "Would you like me to describe the weather today? Or, I found a book in the library you might like. May I read it to you?" And she read. Her voice came alive. Not like a script, but like a friend leaning close. He hadn't smiled while listening to anything in months, until Lina described the adventures of a blind knight who saved a kingdom by listening to the wind. "You read this like you've lived it," he told her once. She paused. "Maybe because I've lived in shadows too." Elias tilted his head, curious, but she didn't explain. One afternoon, she was cleaning his study while he sat nearby, thumbing through a braille keyboard that still felt alien. She didn't interrupt, just hummed softly, a tune he couldn't name but somehow calmed him. "Why do you hum that?" he asked suddenly. She stopped. "It's what my grandmother used to sing when I was scared of the dark." He nodded slowly, the corners of his mouth twitching. A pause. "I'm sorry you're hurting, Elias," she said gently, "but pain doesn't mean you're broken." That line struck him in the ribs like a blow. No one ever said that. They said, "You'll get better, you need time, or worse, you're still lucky to be alive." But Lina's words were different. Healing, and not about sight, but about soul. Later that week, while sipping lukewarm tea, Vanessa left him without a word. Elias whispered. She entered like always, soft, unintrusive. "Would you sit for a minute?" He couldn't see her expression, but he heard the slight intake of breath. Then the chair creaked beside him. "You okay?" she asked. "Can I ask you something honest?" "Why are you so kind to me? You're not trying to impress me. You don't pity me. You're just here." She hesitated. Then, quietly, "Because sometimes people forget that the ones who seem the strongest are the ones bleeding quietly." He exhaled slowly. In a world full of doctors, specialists, even his own fiancée treating him like a patient, Lina treated him like a man. Not a broken millionaire, not a symbol of tragedy, just Elias. The days grew longer, and for the first time in over a year, Elias didn't dread waking up. Lina became more than just an assistant. She was his rhythm. She moved through the mansion with a calm energy that made everything else feel less suffocating. While Vanessa still handled his schedule and reminded him of doctor's appointments in a clipped tone, it was Lina who remembered that he liked his water with lemon in the afternoons, that classical music soothed his nerves, and that silence was sometimes the most. One evening, as the golden light filtered through the curtains, a detail Lina shared with him because he could not see it himself, he sat in the music room. "Describe it to me," Elias asked. Lina paused, her voice gentle. "The light is warm, like honey. It wraps around the piano bench, touches your shoulders like it's trying to remind you of something soft." Elias swallowed. "I used to play when I was upset, like it helped organize my thoughts." Lina didn't push. She just said, "Would you like to try again?" He shook his head, then realized she couldn't see that. He said aloud, "I'm not ready." "Okay," she said softly, and then sat with him in silence. That was the thing about Lina. She never filled the silence with useless words. She waited, patient, present, not trying to fix him, just being there. One night, during a dinner he could barely taste, Vanessa's voice cut through the stillness. "You're spending a lot of time with the maid." Elias froze. "She has a name? Lina." Vanessa's fork clinked against her plate. "You know what I mean? The staff should be staff. You don't need company." "You're wrong," Elias said, his voice lower than usual. "I need kindness, I need truth, and she gives me both." Vanessa stood, her tone tight. "You think I haven't been kind?" Elias didn't answer. Because kindness, delivered like a duty, wasn't kindness at all. That night, he sat on the garden bench, fingers tracing the worn wood. Lina approached quietly. "I heard raised voices," she said. He offered a tight smile. "Yeah, just another chapter in the quiet war of pretending everything's fine." She sat beside him. "You don't have to pretend with me." He turned toward her voice. "You really believe that people can heal from anything?" "Believe the heart doesn't forget how to feel," she said. "It just needs someone to remind it." That line lingered in him long after she left. A few days later, she brought him a small plant. He could feel the cool ceramic pot, the rough soil, the soft brush of leaves against his fingertips. "I thought maybe you'd like to grow something again," she said. He chuckled. "Is this your way of saying I'm rotten?" She laughed. "It's my way of saying you're still alive." He held the pot, strangely moved. "What kind of plant is it?" "For a wild gardenia," she said. "It's blooming today." He smiled. "Tell me what it looks like." She leaned in. "Its petals are soft and layered, like folded silk, and it smells like summer, clean, rich, hopeful." He breathed in, and for the first time since losing his sight, he felt the world not through vision but through scent, sound, and presence. Through her. There was something different about Lina, and he was starting to feel it more each day. It wasn't just her kindness, it was her understanding, her quiet strength. It was how she knew when to speak and when to stay. how she didn't flinch when he bumped into things or dropped something, how she never made him feel less, even when he was at his lowest. Especially then. He began asking for her more often, not to clean, not to read, just to sit, to talk. She told him stories from her childhood, how she grew up in a small town, how she used to guide her younger brother through alleyways when he was too scared of crowds, how she learned to feel things with her soul, not just her eyes. One night, as she helped him to his room, Elias stopped in the hallway. "Lina," he said, his voice unusually rough, "do you think people can find light again after losing everything?" She paused. "I think the light never leaves us. We just forget how to open the window." He chuckled quietly. "You always have an answer, don't you?" She replied, "I just know what it feels like to live in the dark." He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't need to. He felt it. One morning, as the house stirred with the rustle of routine, Elias waited in the drawing room, hands folded. When Lina walked in, he turned toward her immediately. "I want to try the piano." She froze. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "I can't see the keys, but I can still feel them." She guided him gently. His fingers trembled, hovering above the ivories. The first note was shaky. The second, truer. And then, music. Not perfect, not polished, but real. Elias played with closed eyes, not that it mattered, and tears slipped down his cheeks. Lina didn't interrupt. She just sat beside him, head bowed, listening to a man finding his way back to himself. When he finished, the silence wrapped around them like a blanket. "It was beautiful," she whispered. He turned to her voice, a raw truth in his chest. "Lina, I don't know what you've been through, but I'm glad you're here." She reached out, resting a hand over his. In the shadows where he used to live, Elias Moreau had begun to see again, not with his eyes, but with something deeper. And it started with the girl who saw him when no one else did. Morning in the Moreau mansion began not with alarms or calendars, but with sound. Lina opened windows to let the city breathe, and Elias listened to the distant stir of life as if it were a map only he could read. She placed a warm mug into his palms. He caught the faint citrus and mint before sipping. "You switched the tea," he said. "You slept poorly," she answered. "Peppermint helps." He smiled into the rim. "You're getting dangerous. You read me too well." "Only listen." She guided his hand to the grain of the table. "Oak. This side is smoother. The varnish wore thin where you used to sit with your laptop." He traced it, memory flickering. "A coated here at 3 a.m, more nights than I can count." "My fingers remember," she murmured. "Sometimes that's enough." They walked the corridor slowly. Lina placed shells along the baseboards, one rough, one ridged, one polished, tiny landmarks in a kingdom of touch. His fingertips found each one, and he mapped the hallway in textures, not distant. 10 paces, he said, breath steady. "Ridged shell? That's the turn toward the library." "Exactly." In the library, she moved his hand over book spines. Linen, leather, cracked paper. She read aloud the titles, letting the words hum in the air. When she paused, he finished a sentence from memory, astonished at himself and at how much still lived inside him. She brought him to the terrace and held out a plate with sliced peaches. He didn't need to taste to know what waited. The fragrance cut clean through the morning. "Peach," he said. "Late summer." "Your nose is a compass," she said softly. He answered, "Are the wind that tells me where north is." They played music in the afternoons, not the thunder of symphonies he had used like armor, but piano pieces that fit into the room like light. She guided his hands over the piano's carved scrollwork, the cool fallboard, the ivory keys he had learned to fear. When he wanted to stop, she didn't insist. When he wanted to try, she let him falter and find his way back. He learned the mansion again through scent. Cardamom in the pantry, faint lavender clinging to the guest sheets, machine oil in the garage. He learned it through temperature. The marble foyer carried a chill even at noon. The music room held a pocket of warmth near the southeast window that Lina said made the curtains breathe like seaweed. He learned it through sound. The shallow splash on the east fountain meant leaves had landed. The deeper gurgle on the west meant the filter needed cleaning. Footfalls told stories. The staff's clipped rhythm, Vanessa's purposeful staccato, Lina's quiet glide that still gave him a picture he trusted. "Tell me a story," he said one evening, hands resting on the piano lid. "About what?" "Make it ordinary." Her voice moved like lamplight. She told him of a winter bus ride with fogged windows, of strangers swapping seats so an old man could sit, of a boy counting stops by tapping his knee. She told it as if memory were a room she was inviting him into. "Your voice," he said when she finished. "It's familiar, like something I knew long ago." She stilled. "Familiar how?" "Like a song I heard through a wall," he said, half smiling. "And now the door's open." She hesitated, and the silence felt deliberate, almost protective. Maybe familiarity is just safety, wearing a different coat. He wanted to ask again, but he felt her withdrawal, like a shore slipping from a wave. Vanessa watched from doorways. If she spoke while Lina stood there, her tone sharpened, as if too much warmth were a threat to the architectural lines of her composure. At brunch, she placed Elias' cutlery to the right of his plate with small, precise clicks. "You're due at Dr. Patel's on Thursday," she said. "We'll discuss the optic nerve scans." "Cancel," Elias said. "I want a week without tests." "You can't just stop your regimen," she replied, incredulity masked as concern. "You want to get better, don't you?" Elias set down his napkin. "Sometimes getting better means not being poked like an experiment." Vanessa's silence hardened. Lina, clearing dishes nearby, faded into the edges of the room, careful not to become a point of friction. After Vanessa left, Elias exhaled. "I'm tired of being a project." Lina stacked plates, the porcelain soft against her palms. "You're not a project. Am I to you?" Her answer came without hesitation. "You're a person who knows the smell of peaches." He laughed, surprised, unguarded. "You always do that." "Turn my edges into something human." "You only hold a mirror," she said. "You're the reflection." He felt heat behind his eyes and reached blindly toward the sound of her voice. She didn't step back. They practiced stairs with patience. Lina taught him to count risers, to find the rhythm of his stride. He stumbled once. She steadied him, her hand firm at his elbow, and he recognized a steadiness that was not merely physical. "You're not afraid," he said. "I'm terrified," she answered lightly. "But fear doesn't have to steer." Laughed together at nothing and at everything. He carved a small groove down the banister with his thumbnail by accident. Now it was his marker. She wrapped a thread around the knob of his bedroom door so the fibers would kiss his fingers before the latch. He found it in the night and, strangely, slept better. One afternoon, Vanessa halted Lina in the corridor. Elias stood around the corner, invisible. "You've grown comfortable," Vanessa said, words smooth as glass. "Follow the schedule," Lina answered calmly. "It's not what I mean. You're engaging beyond basic duties. Reading, walking, sitting with him for hours. This isn't a friendship club." Lina's voice did not waver. "He's healing. He is adjusting," Vanessa shot back. "Don't confuse proximity with permission. There are boundaries in this house." "I understand boundaries," Lina said. "Do you?" The heels clicked away. Elias remained where he was, chest tight with a confused gratitude and a fog of shame for not stepping forward. He couldn't untangle what he owed to whom. He only knew the corridor felt colder after Vanessa's footsteps vanished. That evening, he asked Lina to join him on the terrace. The scent of gardenia drifted in from the pots she'd placed weeks before. "Tell me the color of the sky," he said. "Raven," she said after a breath, "like silk cooled by rain. There's a thin strip of light behind the clouds, as if someone left the door to a brighter room slightly open." He pictured it not as sight, but as temperature and space. And the city? Its murmuring? The late trains sound like breath, not machines. He held the image like a warm stone. "Your voice," he ventured, "feels like somewhere I've stood before. even if I don't know where. Maybe it's the stories, she said. Maybe we've all lived the same ones and call them by different names. He knew she was deflecting, but gently, and for now he accepted it. They began a ritual of sound mapping after dusk. She rang a small bell from different corners of the terrace, and he pointed, learning how echoes behaved. She ran water into 2 glasses, one tall, one short, and had him tell which was which by tone. He got it wrong, laughed, tried again, and found his way through failure without the old bitterness. "Hear the world like a composer," she said one night, impressed. "I used to hear it like a CEO," he said. "Only the loudest mattered. What matters now?" He angled his face toward the breeze. "The quiet that holds me up." On a rainy afternoon, she brought him a bowl of oranges. She placed one in his hand and asked him to peel it slowly. The skin released its oils in a bright burst. Juice nicked his wrist. The room filled with sun, though the windows held cloud. "What do you taste?" she asked. "Childhood," he said, stunned. "Kitchen linoleum, my mother's bracelets clicking when she laughed." The memory broke something open. He sat very still while it moved through him. When he found words, they were softer than before. "You make the dark less lonely," he said. She didn't reply immediately. He heard her swallow. "You make the quiet less empty." Later, Vanessa stepped into the music room without knocking. "We have a gala next month," she said briskly. "Investors, the foundation, press. You'll attend, of course." Elias kept his hands on the keys. "We'll see." With tears, she snapped, then winced at the word. "You need to show you're still capable, Elias. People are watching." "I'm tired of being watched," he said. Vanessa's gaze slid to Lina in the doorway. "Then stop giving the help a front row seat." Lina lowered her eyes and slipped out, turning herself into air. Elias's jaw tightened. He wanted to protest, to name what in him recoiled, but exhaustion wrapped around his bones. After Vanessa left, he pressed one low note, let it bleed into the room, and whispered, "I swear, I never asked for a witness." Lina returned without a word and set a cup beside him. Cinnamon floated up. "You don't have to ask," she said. "I'm here because I want to be." He turned toward her, sightless but certain. "That's the first thing anyone has given me in a year that didn't feel earned by suffering." She sat on the bench's far edge, careful about distance. "Then keep it." He did. That night he dreamed, in sound, bells, rain, footsteps that didn't hurry past, a voice that knew how to open windows in rooms he thought were sealed. He woke with the strange fullness of having traveled somewhere and returned. "Good morning," Lina said from the doorway. "Be as he arrows," surprised to find he meant it. Their lessons continued. He learned the kitchen by scent and heat, could identify the stove knobs by a tiny nick she had filed into one, and the drawer of wooden spoons by the soft clatter they made. He learned the garden by soil texture, gritty near the hydrangeas, soft and damp under the ferns. He learned that the house, which had felt like a mausoleum, breathed if you listened for it. And he learned that Lina's voice could hold a whole day in it. One evening, after she finished reading, he asked again, gently, "Why does your voice feel like home?" She was quiet long enough that he almost backtracked. "Because home isn't a place," she said at last. "It's a person who doesn't flinch when you can't see them." He nodded, throat thick. "Then, I'm home." Behind doors, jealousy gathered. Vanessa's schedule requests sharpened. Staff carried messages on her behalf that sounded like warnings. Elias sensed the tension without shape, like static before a storm. He didn't know the words exchanged in hallways. He only knew that when Lina entered a room, the storm in him fell back to sea. And that was enough, for now. The days blended into one another, yet for Elias, each hour with Lina seemed to carry a new shade of discovery. His world had been reduced to routine before her arrival. Medications, silence, occasional conversations with Vanessa that felt more like transactions than care. But with Lina, each ordinary task. One afternoon, she guided him into the study, where the scent of dust and old leather lingered. "Here," she said softly, placing a square of rough cloth into his hands. It's burlap. Farmers use it for sacks. He rubbed it between his fingers, frowning at the coarse texture. It feels like stubbornness. Lina laughed. Or resilience. Then she gave him another strip of silk. His hands moved slowly, reverently. And this? Luxury, he murmured. Or fragility. She smiled at how he gave meaning to touch, as if he were writing poems through his fingers. Vanessa, passing by the open door, frowned at the sound of his laughter. That evening, Lina brought in a small portable speaker. "I want you to hear something," she said. She played a melody on her phone game piano, threaded with violins. Elias closed his eyes out of instinct, though he knew it made no difference. The music unfurled memories he thought were locked away. His mother's humming, the echo of glass in a Paris hotel ballroom, even the rhythm of rain on the windshield the night of the accident. "Kings, you do this?" he whispered. "You make me see without eyes." "We've always seen," she said. "You just needed a different window." The words struck him deeply. He wanted to ask about her, to know why her voice carried such weight. "Lina," he said slowly, "your voice. It feels like something I've known before. Where does it come from?" She stilled. He could feel it in the air, the hesitation. Finally she answered, "It comes from stories I've carried. Stories I don't always tell." Before he could press, the sharp click of heels entered the room. Vanessa's perfume announced her even before she spoke. "What's going on here?" Tuzik said. Elias said simply, "Lina was showing me something." Vanessa's voice sharpened. "Lina, I told you before, you are not here to indulge him with whatever this is. You're here for basic tasks. Don't overstep." Elias shifted, uneasy. "Fiancée?" But Lina interrupted gently, bowing her head. "I only wanted to help." She turned off the music and slipped out, leaving the silence heavy. That night, Elias sat awake in his chair long after Vanessa retired upstairs. He could still hear Lina's voice, could still feel the honesty in her tone. It wasn't overstepping, it was life, and he realized how much he needed it. The next morning, Lina continued as though nothing had happened. She brought him coffee, narrated the day's weather, and described the way the light hit the garden, though he couldn't see it. "The roses look proud," she said softly, "almost like they know they survived the storm." He turned his head toward her voice, smiling faintly. "Like me." Later, as they walked the terrace, he said, "Vanessa thinks you overstepped?" Lina kept her pace even. "Maybe she's right. Maybe I shouldn't be here." Elias said quickly, more forcefully than he intended. He steadied his tone. "You make me alive again. Do you understand?" 2 steps, but it wasn't rejection. It was weight, careful and thoughtful. Finally, she whispered, "Then, I'll stay as long as I can help." The words were simple, but to Elias, they were everything. Days passed, and their bond deepened through the smallest things. She taught him to recognize spices by smell: cinnamon, clove, rosemary. She let him guess fruits by touch: round apple, soft peach, grainy pear. He grew proud of each success, laughing at mistakes, finding joy in failures that once would have enraged him. Vanessa, however, grew colder. At dinner with investors, she remarked loudly, "It's strange, isn't it? A maid spending so much time in personal matters, perhaps too much." Elias didn't respond, but later, alone in his study, he clenched his fists. For the first time, he wondered who truly stood beside him. The woman who wore his ring, or the woman who held his darkness without judgment. That night, Lina entered quietly to check the windows. He turned toward her. "Do you know what I realized?" "Your voice is the only thing I trust completely." She froze, the words hanging between them. She wanted to reply, to tell him why his trust meant more than he knew. But footsteps echoed down the hall, and Vanessa's sharp tone called out his name. Lina slipped away again, leaving Elias with the truth and the ache of not knowing. He leaned back, listening to the fading sound of her presence. For the first time in years, he felt hope. For the first time since the accident, the darkness didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a place where a voice could guide him toward light. And though he didn't yet understand why, Elias knew that voice was Lina's, and losing it would mean losing the fragile world she was rebuilding inside him. The rain drummed against the tall windows of the mansion, soft at first, then harder, like 1,000 small knocks that no one dared answer. Elias sat in the study, his cane resting against his chair, his fingers tracing the smooth wood of the desk. He had been restless all afternoon, pacing when he could, retreating into silence when the weight of memory felt too sharp. It was then, as he passed the open hallway leading to the sitting room, that he heard Vanessa's voice. Her laughter, polished, hollow through the thin crack of the door. He froze, not wanting to eavesdrop but unable to move away. "I can't believe I'm still here," Vanessa's voice rang, cruel and sharp. "Do you know what it's like to babysit a blind man? Elias used to be powerful, commanding. Now? He's helpless, a shadow clinging to me. But soon it won't matter. His fortune is all that counts." The words struck like a blade to the chest. Elias pressed his hand against the wall, his breath catching. He had suspected coldness in her touch, distance in her words, but hearing her scorn, hearing her mock his blindness as though it were an inconvenience, he felt the floor tilt beneath him. He stepped back quietly, careful not to be heard, and made his way to his study. He shut the door, sinking into his chair, the darkness around him heavier than it had been in months. His chest rose and fell unevenly, as though he had run miles. His fiancée, the woman who had promised to stay, who the world praised for her devotion, she had never stayed out of love. For hours, Elias said nothing. He didn't ring for food, didn't call for help. He sat in silence, the voices of his past haunting him. Memories of the man he had been before the accident, the empire he had built, the certainty in his stride. Now, all of it seemed like ashes. It was close to evening when the door creaked softly. A gentle knock preceded a quieter voice. "Mr. Moreau?" It was Lina. He didn't answer. He didn't want pity. But the scent of soup drifted in as she stepped closer, the faint clink of porcelain echoing in the study. She placed the bowl on the table beside him. "You haven't eaten," she said softly. Still, he said nothing. He clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to break, to rage, to collapse. Instead of pressing, Lina sat. He could feel her presence, calm, steady. She didn't fill the silence with empty chatter. She simply waited. Minutes passed, the storm outside rattling the windows. Finally, Elias exhaled a shuddering breath. "I heard her," he whispered. "Vanessa, on the phone. She mocked me, called me helpless, a burden." His voice cracked, and she was right. Lina said instantly, her tone fierce though soft. "She was cruel, there's a difference." He turned his face toward her voice, though his eyes saw nothing but shadows. "What am I, Lina? I've lost everything that made me who I was. My power, my independence, even my pride." Her chair scraped faintly as she shifted closer. "You haven't lost everything. You still breathe, you still feel, you still matter." For a long moment, Elias let those words linger. They felt foreign, yet warm. He hadn't been told he mattered in years, not since the accident. "You don't know what it's like," he said hoarsely. There was a pause. Then, Lina's voice, quiet but steady. "Maybe I do." Elias stilled. "I wasn't always a maid," she continued. "I trained, once, in healing. Not hospitals, not medicine the way you know it, but alternative practices, holistic therapy, sensory rehabilitation, energy alignment. Some people laughed at it, some believed. For me it was a calling." Her hands tightened in her lap. He could hear it in the way her voice trembled. "But I failed. A patient trusted me and I couldn't help them. After that, I stopped. I told myself I wasn't meant for it." Her confession filled the silence, fragile and raw. Elias tilted his head. "You were a healer?" "Tried to be," she admitted. "And maybe that's why I notice things others don't. The way your hands tense when you walk through the hall. The way your breathing changes when storms come. The way you still tilt your face toward the sun when you sit outside, as if searching for warmth you can't see." She exhaled. "But I'm no miracle worker. I left that world behind." Elias swallowed hard. For the first time since Vanessa's words, he felt something stir, a flicker of interest, of hope. "Why did you fail?" he asked. Her voice cracked. "Because I couldn't fix what was broken. And when you promise someone healing and fail, it feels like you've stolen hope. I couldn't bear it." The weight of her pain pressed into the room. Elias, for all his grief, understood it. Failure, guilt, shame, he had carried them too. After a long silence, he said, "Maybe it wasn't failure. Maybe it was unfinished." Lina looked at him, though he couldn't see her gaze. "You said you stopped trying," Elias continued. "But maybe you were meant to try again." Her lips parted. "Mr. Moreau?" "Elias," he corrected softly. "If you're going to speak of hope, use my name." "Elias," she whispered, the words fragile in the air. He leaned forward slightly, his hands gripping the edge of the chair. "Lina, tell me the truth. Can you help me? My eyes, my world, is there anything you can do?" The storm rattled again, as though demanding her answer. She hesitated, fear flickering across her face, though he couldn't see it. Finally, she said, "Maybe, but only if you trust me." Elias's breath caught. For the first time in years, the darkness around him did not feel eternal. It felt like a veil, thin, waiting to be lifted. And Lina, the quiet girl with a hidden light, might be the only one who could show him how. Hope, fragile but fierce, sparked in his chest. The fire in the hearth had died down, leaving only the faint crackle of embers. Elias sat with his head bowed, his fingers tapping restlessly on the arm of his chair. Lina remained close, quiet, her presence steady like a lighthouse against the storm that had nearly swallowed him earlier. At last, Elias broke the silence. "You said you could try, that you might help me. What does that mean, Alvi? What would you do?" Her breath trembled. "It isn't simple, and it isn't certain." She clasped her hands together, staring at the faint glow of the coals. "The methods I studied, they were about awakening what was still alive in the body, encouraging nerves, retraining the brain, using sound and light and touch. It's not magic, it's persistence, it's faith. But after I failed once, I swore I'd never attempt it again." Elias turned his head toward her, his face shadowed but intent. "You speak as though failure is the end. It isn't. I built empires from failures. But this," he turned his temple, his sightless eyes narrowing. "This I cannot face alone. And you may be the only one willing to stand in the dark with me." Her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him she wasn't ready, that the thought of trying again terrified her. Yet the way he spoke, so raw, so stripped of the billionaire's mask everyone else still saw, made her realize how much he needed more than caretaking. He needed belief. "Me," she whispered. "You have doctors, surgeons, specialists. Why put your trust in someone like me?" "Because they see me as a case," Elias answered. "You see me as a man?" His lips curved faintly, the shadow of a smile. "That's rarer than you know." The words pierced through her hesitation. For so long, she had been running from the memory of her failure, hiding in service work, telling herself she had no right to heal again. But Elias's, it was fragile, tentative, yet it pressed against her heart with undeniable force. "I could try," she admitted softly, "but if it doesn't work, Elias, it could break you all over again." He reached across the small space between them, his hand brushing the air uncertainly. She guided it gently to rest atop hers. His fingers curled around her hand, warm, steady. "Then let me be the one to decide what's worth breaking." Her throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes. For the first time since her confession, silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like a vow being formed, something unspoken yet binding. The door creaked suddenly. Both turned toward the sound. Vanessa's heels clicked sharply against the floor as she entered, her perfume flooding the air. "So this is where you've been hiding," she said coolly. "I called for you twice, Elias." Elias stiffened, his hand withdrawing reluctantly from Lina's. "I was resting," he said, his tone neutral. Vanessa's gaze shifted to Lina, her lips curling. Resting or being entertained? Lina lowered her eyes, not replying. "Enough, Vanessa," Elias said quietly, though there was a hint of steel beneath his calm. She was keeping me company, nothing more. Vanessa's laugh was brittle. Company, of course. Just remember, Elias, not everyone around you has pure intentions. Some are here for what you can give. Her eyes cut pointedly toward Lina, then back to Elias. Dinner is ready. Don't keep me waiting. With that, she turned sharply and left. The room felt colder once she was gone. Lina stood slowly. I should go. Play him, Elias said quickly, reaching slightly toward her voice. His expression softened. Not yet, please. Her heart ached at the plea. She sat again, hands twisting in her lap. She doesn't trust me. She doesn't know you, Elias replied, and perhaps she never will. He tilted his face toward her. But I do. At least, I want to. The words lingered, a promise woven into the quiet air. That night, long after Vanessa had retired to her wing of the mansion, Lina remained awake in her small quarters. She pulled out a worn journal from her bag, its pages filled with half-finished notes about healing methods she had once practiced. For years, she hadn't dared open it. Now, as the rain eased outside, she began to read again. She traced her old diagrams of exercises, lists of sensory techniques, ways to stimulate dormant nerves. Her fingers trembled as she imagined trying them with Elias. Fear gnawed at her, but so did something else. Hope, fragile but undeniable. The following morning, when she entered the study, Elias was waiting. He stood tall, cane in hand, though his eyes betrayed the weight of another sleepless night. Did you think about what I asked? He murmured. Lina nodded slowly. Yes, and I'll try. He exhaled, a sound that was half relief, half disbelief. Then it begins. Not tomorrow, not Sunday. Today. Their hands met again, sealing the silent agreement. Neither noticed that, behind the door, in the shadows of the hallway, Vanessa stood, listening, her expression unreadable, except for the flicker of fury in her eyes. And so, in that fragile moment, as sunlight finally pierced the storm clouds outside, Elias felt something he hadn't in years, the possibility of light returning. The first session began in silence. The study had been transformed into a softer space, curtains drawn, candles flickering, the faint scent of lavender and chamomile in the air. Lina moved quietly, placing warm herbal compresses near Elias's temples, her hands steady, though her heart beat with anxious uncertainty. Elias sat in the high-backed chair, his cane resting against the desk, his eyes closed, though sight no longer guided him. His breathing was measured, as if he was preparing himself not just for the possibility of change, but for the sting of disappointment should nothing happen. Lina's voice, gentle and even, broke the stillness. You may feel warmth, or nothing at all. Don't force yourself to notice. Just let it happen. Elias gave a small nod, his jaw tightening as if he were bracing himself for failure. Her hands hovered near his face, fingers barely touching his skin. The warmth of her palms radiated, combined with the herb's calming effect. She moved slowly, her training guiding her in subtle motions that were less about science and more about intent. She knew better than anyone that healing was not just physical, it was trust, energy, belief. And it's passed. For a while, nothing stirred, nothing changed. Elias began to sigh, and Lina's heart clenched. But then, a flicker. It was faint, barely more than a shadow cutting across the darkness. Elias straightened, his breath catching. Wait, he whispered, his voice trembling. There's something. Lina froze, searching his expression. What do you see? His hand twitched against the chair's arm. It's not clear, a shimmer, like light through water. It's gone now. Tears stung her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She steadied herself, whispered, That's enough. Even a flicker means something is waking. Elias leaned back, overwhelmed. For years his world had been one of endless black. Even the idea that a glimmer could break through seemed impossible. Yet now, here it was. When the session ended, he didn't speak much, but Lina noticed something in his posture, an almost childlike hope he couldn't hide. The treatments continued nightly, Each time Elias noticed small changes, faint outlines of the candle flame, shadows moving when Lina walked across the room, the blur of his own hand when he lifted it. He didn't tell Vanessa. Some instinct warned him that she would dismiss it, perhaps even use it against him. Instead, he held the secret close, sharing it only with Lina in hushed, trembling words. One evening, after she had finished, Elias remained still, his head tilted toward her. "I saw more tonight," he said, his voice low and hoarse. Her heart raised. "Tell me?" He lifted a shaking hand, pointing. "The light, the candle, and you." His lips quivered, caught between disbelief and awe. "I could see the outline of your face, just faint like smoke. But it was you." Lina's breath caught. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely now. All the years of doubt, the fear that she was nothing but a failure, seemed to crumble in that instant. Elias turned his head toward her, his eyes glistening though they could not fully focus. "You're the first thing I've seen in years." The words shattered something inside her. She reached forward without thinking, her hand brushing his cheek. His hand rose to cover hers, holding it in place. The silence between them grew heavy, not with despair this time, but with something new, something trembling and dangerous. Neither moved away. For a long moment, they sat like that, her hand on his face, his fingers clutching hers tightly, tears sliding silently down both their cheeks. When she finally pulled back, her cheeks flushed, her heart pounding, Elias whispered, "Thank you." But neither of them could ignore how long the touch had lingered, nor the unspoken truth it carried. The change did not go unnoticed. Vanessa's sharp eyes had always been quick to detect shifts, and lately she had begun to sense something slipping out of her control. Elias seemed lighter, more hopeful, less dependent on her presence. And whenever Lina left a room, there was a trace of warmth in Elias that hadn't been there before. One evening, Vanessa cornered Lina in the hallway outside the study. Her tone was laced with venom masked by a smile. "You've been very busy, haven't you?" Lina froze, clutching her apron. "I've only been doing my job, ma'am." Vanessa leaned closer, her eyes cold. "Don't play innocent. I see the way he leans toward you, the way he listens when you speak. Don't think I don't know what you're trying to do." "I've done nothing but care for him," Lina said quietly, though her heart thudded. Dyer's smile tightened. "Careful, girl. That man is mine. Whatever tricks you're using, they won't last. And if I even suspect you're stepping beyond your station, I'll see to it you're gone before you can pack your things." Her voice dropped to a hiss. "And trust me, no one will hire you again." Lina said nothing. She lowered her gaze, keeping her composure, though her hands trembled at her sides. When Vanessa finally swept away, her heels clicking sharply against the marble, Lina slipped into her room and closed the door behind her. She pressed her hands against her chest, trying to steady her breathing. Fear gnawed at her, but so did determination. For the first time in years, Elias had hope. She couldn't abandon that. Not now. That night, she took out her journal again. By candlelight, she began to write, documenting every session, every flicker Elias had described, every detail of the progress. If Vanessa ever tried to twist the truth, Lina would have proof. She would protect Elias, even if it meant risking herself. And as she wrote, her tears fell freely, not of despair, but of a fragile, desperate hope that somehow, the man who once lived in darkness might see the world again. That night, when Lina returned to the study to prepare for another session, Elias was already waiting, his fingers tapping nervously against the arm of his chair as though he had been anticipating her all day. And when she entered, he turned his face toward her with a small smile that made her heart ache, because it was the smile of a man who dared to believe. Again. She lit the candles slowly, carefully placing them where the glow could surround them in warmth. And as the flickering light filled the room, she guided his hands toward the textures of the wooden table, the edges of the compress, deep the smooth glass of the vial she had prepared, whispering to him that it was all right to trust the sensations, even if the sight was still faint. And as she placed her palms gently over his closed eyes, he exhaled shakily, whispering that he could see a shimmer, a soft outline, and then suddenly he gasped, his lips trembling as he said he could see her again. Clearer this time, the shape of her hair outlined by the candle flame. And when Lina asked, softly, what else he could see, he whispered hope with tears streaming down his face. She could not hold her own back, and as her tears fell, she leaned closer, telling him that even if his sight never returned fully, the strength he was showing was more powerful than anything she had ever seen. But Elias reached for her hand, holding it with surprising firmness, telling her that for the first time since the accident, he felt alive, that her presence had dragged him out of the shadows, and though she wanted to hide her heart, she could not, because in that moment, the connection between them was undeniable. And when her hand brushed his cheek again, lingering just long enough to feel the warmth of his skin beneath her fingertips, Vanessa's voice suddenly cut through the moment like a blade. Sharp, furious, accusing Lina of crossing lines, of playing games with a man too broken to know better, and Elias flinched, his body stiffening. But Lina, instead of crumbling under the venom, remained silent, her calmness infuriating Vanessa even more as she spat that she would have Lina dismissed within the week. Elias tried to speak, but his voice faltered, his old habits of silence and dependence clawing at him, and Lina only lowered her eyes and nodded once, excusing herself from the confrontation. But when she reached her room that night, she sat at her small desk and wrote everything down in her journal. The date, the progress, the moment Elias had seen her face. And as her candle burned low, she whispered a promise to herself that she would not give up, not while there was still light flickering in his darkness, not while his heart had begun to beat again. Elias, left in the study alone after Vanessa stormed away, sat in silence with tears drying on his cheeks, his fingers pressed to the place where Lina's hand had rested, and though he could not see the full truth yet, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was no longer afraid of the dark. Not while Lina was near, and even if he could not speak it aloud just yet, he knew his world was beginning to change forever. The mansion was quiet, cloaked in its usual silence, when Elias stopped near the staircase late one evening. His cane tapped lightly against the marble, but he moved slower than usual, his ears sharp, his body taut with a strange awareness. Voices drifted from the drawing room, Vanessa's voices, low and cutting, paired with that of a man he didn't recognize. He held his breath, tilting his head toward the sound. Deeply. "You worry too much," Vanessa whispered sharply. "He's blind, he'll stay blind, and once the wedding happens, everything, his fortune, his empire, will effectively be mine." Elias's pulse roared in his ears, his grip tightening on the cane. The stranger laughed quietly. "But what if he regains something? What if medicine advances?" Tweaked, Vanessa hissed, helpless. "And I've made sure he knows he needs me." Elias is too proud to admit it, but he's broken. "All I have to do is keep playing the loyal fiancé until the papers are signed. Then, it won't matter if he ever sees again." A chill slid down Elias's spine. For months he had doubted his instincts, brushing away small doubts about Vanessa's coldness. But here it was, the truth, laid bare in her own venomous words. His hand trembled as he reached into his pocket. He had started carrying a small recorder Lina had found for him, claiming it could help him jot down thoughts when his mind grew restless. Now, with a quiet click, it became the weapon he didn't know he needed. Vanessa's laugh rang again, sharp as broken glass. "By the time anyone suspects, it will be too late. He trusts me, he has no one else." Elias forced himself to stand tall, to keep his steps even as he walked past the doorway without pausing, his face blank. Inside, his heart cracked. He had been betrayed before, but never in such a cruel, calculated way. Later, in the quiet of his study, Lina found him sitting rigid in his chair, the recorder clenched in his fist. She touched his arm gently. "What happened?" she whispered. He turned his face toward her, his voice raw. "I heard her. I have proof now. She never loved me, Nina. She only wanted what blindness made easier to steal." Her hand covered his, steadying his trembling fingers. "Then we must be careful. She will notice if you change too suddenly. Pretend you still believe her." For the first time, Elias's lips curved in something between sadness and resolve. "I will. But Lina, I won't let her win." From that night forward, Elias moved with a deliberate calm, masking the storm inside him. He allowed Vanessa to hover, allowed her to brush her hand over his shoulder as if she were the devoted partner. But beneath the surface, he began to notice everything. His eyes, once lost to total darkness, now caught the faintest glimmers. At first, it was no more than a blurred shadow when someone crossed. Then it became outline. The tall, angular shape of Vanessa, the softer silhouette of Lina when she entered with a tray. In secret, he practiced. When Vanessa was away, Lina guided him, letting his fingers trace the edges of books and then matching those sensations to the dim shapes he thought he saw. Each time he recognized something correctly, she smiled, though she tried to hide it. "You're improving," she said softly, hope lacing her voice. Her encouragement became a balm. With her, the world no longer felt like a cage of shadows. It was a place he could begin to reclaim. And as the days passed, Elias realized that when Lina was near, the faint outlines seemed sharper, brighter, as though her presence itself carried light. One evening, as he sat in the study, Vanessa entered with her usual perfume, sharp, overwhelming. She placed a hand on his shoulder, speaking sweetly about their future. Elias kept his face still, but inside he replayed her whispered betrayal over and over. He answered her with measured calm, pretending blindness had left him ignorant, but when she left, his hand clenched around the recorder hidden beneath his desk drawer. After she was gone, Lina appeared quietly, her steps light as always. She noticed his expression, the tension in his jaw. Kneeling beside him, she whispered, "You're carrying too much alone." Elias exhaled slowly, his voice breaking. "Lina, she thinks, I'll never see the game. She plans to take everything. And yet, when I sit here with you, I see more than I ever thought I would." Her eyes filled with something unspoken, but she only pressed his hand gently. "Then hold on to that. We'll face her lies together." To that night, as Elias lay awake in his darkened room, the faint shapes of the world lingering at the edges of his vision, he admitted a truth to himself he could no longer deny. His salvation wasn't in the empire he had built, nor in the woman who claimed to love him. It was in Lina, the quiet, steady light who had walked into his shadows and made him believe in dawn again. And with every flicker of sight he gained, he knew. He was falling in love. The grand dining hall glittered under chandeliers, their golden light shimmering across polished silverware and crystal glasses. Guests murmured in admiration of the Whitmore estate, their eyes often drifting toward Vanessa, who moved gracefully at the head of the long table. She leaned in toward Elias with an air of ownership, her hand brushing his shoulder as though to remind everyone that she was the one who guided the blind millionaire through life's shadows. "Such a devoted fiancé," one woman whispered to her companion. "Imagine standing by a man who will never see again. What loyalty." Vanessa smiled faintly at the words, tilting her head just enough to catch them. Elias remained still, his cane resting beside his chair, his expression neutral. Lina stood at the far end of the room, hands clasped, her eyes lowered, though her heart thudded with unease. She knew what he planned tonight, yet the thought of it unfolding in front of so many eyes made her tremble. Dinner began. Courses served one by one, laughter and conversation filling the hall. Vanessa soaked in the admiration like sunlight, weaving stories of her sacrifices, speaking for Elias when people addressed him. Each time, Elias simply nodded, his face unreadable, as if he were trapped in the very role she designed for him. Then, as champagne was poured and glasses lifted, a subtle shift rippled through the room. Elias's hand, steady, reached for his glass, not fumbling, not hesitant. He lifted it high and turned, his eyes locking directly onto Vanessa. The room fell silent. Guests gasped softly, unsure of what they had just seen. Vanessa's smile faltered. "Darling," she said quickly, her voice tight. "You don't have to." "I can see you," Elias said firmly, his voice carrying through the hall. "I can see all of you." The words cut like a blade. Silence deepened until the only sound was the faint clinking of a spoon dropped onto a plate. Elias's gaze, sharp and unwavering, burned into Vanessa's face. "And now, you will all see her for who she truly is." His hand reached into his coat pocket and drew out the small recorder. With a click, Vanessa's own voice filled the glittering hall, her tone dripping with cruelty. "He's blind. He'll stay blind. Once the wedding happens, everything, his fortune, his empire, will be mine." Gasps erupted. A woman covered her mouth. A man muttered, "Good God." The whispers swelled into outrage. All eyes turned to Vanessa, whose face drained of color. Dia's mask cracked instantly. This is taken out of context," she stammered, her words tumbling over each other. You don't understand, I was scheming, Elias finished, his voice heavy with calm fury. While I sat in darkness, you plotted to chain me to it. Guests exchanged horrified looks. A couple rose from their seats, unwilling to stay. Vanessa's desperation grew visible as she tried to grab Elias's arm, but he pulled back, his sight fixed on her with newfound clarity. Leave, he commanded, his tone cold as steel. Leave this house, leave my life. Her breath caught, fury flashing in her eyes, but the murmurs of disapproval from the guests gave her no shield to hide behind. Vanessa's heels clicked sharply against the marble as she turned and fled the hall, her once carefully constructed world crumbling into. The room remained hushed in the aftermath, the grandeur of the evening now overshadowed by betrayal unveiled. Slowly, Elias lowered the recorder, his shoulders loosening as though a heavy weight had finally slipped away. But when he turned his head, Lina was gone from the corner where she had been standing. He found her near the side entrance, her cloak wrapped around her shoulders, her bag clutched tightly. She froze when he called her name, her back stiffening as if she had been caught committing a sin. You don't have to explain, she whispered without turning. You've found your strength again. You don't need me anymore. Her words cracked his heart. He stepped closer, each footfall steady, his vision still hazy but clear enough to see her trembling frame. Lina, he said, his voice breaking, you were the reason I found it. Don't you understand? When the world turned dark, you were the light that guided me here. Her shoulders shook, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. I was just meant to clean your halls, Elias, nothing more. If I stay, people will say I overstepped. Then let them talk, Elias replied, his hand reaching out until it found hers. Let them call it whatever they want. Because I know, the truth, without you I would still be blind in every way that matters. She finally turned, her eyes glistening, her lips parting in a quiet gasp at the raw honesty in his face. In that moment, the hall behind them and its murmuring guests ceased to exist. There was only Elias and Lina, two souls who had found each other in the dark, clinging to the fragile but undeniable light of truth. The garden was hushed under the silver glow of moonlight, the roses swaying gently as though they too breathed in the night air. Elias stepped carefully onto the familiar path, his vision still blurred at the edges but sharper now than it had been in years. Every flicker of candlelight from the windows behind him, every silhouette of ivy curling over the trellis, seemed to whisper that this was where truths were waiting to be spoken. It was here that Lina had often hummed quietly, tending to the flowers as if they, too, were fragile souls in need of comfort. And there she was, standing by the fountain, her cloak wrapped tightly around her, a small travel bag at her feet. She turned slightly at the sound of his footsteps, her expression uncertain, as if caught between staying and fleeing. Elias, she breathed, her voice breaking, you shouldn't be out here. You should be inside, celebrating your freedom. He shook his head, taking another step closer. My freedom means nothing if you're not in it. His words hung in the air, heavy and trembling with sincerity. Lina, I can't see a future without you, literally or figuratively. Don't leave me in the dark again. Her lips parted, and for a moment, she looked as though she might bolt. But then her gaze softened, and tears welled in her eyes. You don't understand, she whispered. I was never meant to be in your world. I was born into shadows of my own. My father, he was a healer. He spent his life helping others, but jealousy and lies destroyed him. They accused him of fraud, of hurting the very people he tried to heal. Our family lost everything. I promised myself I would never be close to power again. It ruins lives. Elias closed the final distance between them, his hand gently cupping her trembling fingers. And yet you saved mine, he said. You brought me back to life when I had given up on even existing. If this is ruin, then I'll take it gladly, because nothing, no fortune, no empire, means more than the light you gave me. Her tears fell then, streaming silently down her cheeks, and she leaned into his chest. His arms came around her, holding her with the kind of strength that promised safety, not chains. You don't know what you're saying, she sobbed. You're a man with everything. I'm just... Enough, Elias interrupted, his voice firm but tender. He tilted her face upward so her eyes met his. You're not just anything, you are the reason I can see again, the reason I want to live again. Without you, I am only a man surrounded by shadows. With you, I am whole." At that moment, footsteps echoed on the stone path, and Michael, the longtime business partner who had carried the company while Elias was blind, appeared, his sharp suit a stark contrast against the garden's softness. He paused, surprise flickering across his face as he took in the scene. "Elias," he said, his voice low but urgent, "the board is waiting. They've heard the news. They want you back. Tonight you could reclaim everything, your company, your legacy. All you have to do is say yes." Lina pulled back, her face paling. She moved to step aside, to free him from the weight of her presence, but Elias caught her hand again, steady and unyielding. He turned his gaze toward Michael, his once icy eyes now clear with resolve. "I won't return," he said simply. Michael blinked. "You can't be serious. Elias, this company was your life. It was your vision before the accident, and it can be again now. Don't throw it away for it." His eyes flicked to Lina. "Really?" Elias cut in, his voice carrying both authority and gentleness. "For peace? For the chance to live like a man, not a machine? Yes, Michael, I'm serious. The empire means nothing to me if it costs me the very heart that reminded me what life feels like." Michael's jaw tightened, but something in Elias's expression, unyielding yet calmer than he had ever seen, made him falter. He sighed and shook his head slowly. "You always were stubborn. I suppose I can fight you on this, but know this. Elias, you'll lose their respect, you'll lose everything you built." Elias's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Then let it crumble, because in losing it, I've found something greater." He turned to Lina again, his hand never releasing hers. "I've found her." Her breath caught, her tears flowing freely now. "Elias," she whispered, trembling, "why would you give up so much for me?" "Because all of that," he said, gesturing faintly toward the mansion glowing behind them, "was built on ambition, pride, and fear. And all of this," his hand tightened around hers, pulling it gently to his chest, over his heart, "is built on hope, on trust, on love. I won't let that slip away again." Lina's defenses broke completely. She buried her face against him, clutching his shirt as though anchoring herself to the only truth she'd ever dared to believe in. He held her in silence, letting the weight of the moment settle, the roses swaying around them like silent witnesses to their vow. Michael watched, his expression softening, as if realizing Elias had found something no empire could provide. With a quiet nod, he stepped back toward the house. Then, "Live your life, old friend," he murmured. "For once, live it for yourself." When he was gone, only the night remained, the rustle of leaves, the soft gurgle of the fountain, and their shared breaths entwined in the cool air. Elias leaned back just enough to search Lina's eyes, his own vision still not perfect but clear enough to see the glimmer of hope in hers. "Stay," he whispered, "not as my maid, not as my healer, but as my partner, my equal, my love." Lina's lips trembled, and then a quiet laugh escaped her, a laugh threaded with disbelief and wonder. "You've always been stubborn," she said, echoing Michael's words, "but this time, I don't want you to change." She lifted her hand to his face, tracing the contours with fingertips that had once guided him through darkness. "You see me now, not just with your eyes," and he kissed her forehead gently, sealing the promise, not with grand gestures, but with the simplicity of truth. For the first time in years, Elias felt the night wasn't cold, the garden wasn't empty, and his life wasn't lost. It was just beginning again. Here, with Lina, in the garden of second chances. The morning light spilled across the valley in golden sheets, warming the earth with a glow that seemed to mirror Elias's new life. 2 years had passed since the night of the confrontation, and though much had changed in the world of business and wealth, what truly mattered had grown quietly, steadily, in the sanctuary Elias and Lina had built together. The retreat stood on the edge of a meadow, its walls not of marble or steel but of wood and glass, open to the embrace of nature. Here, people came not to seek fortune or status, but healing. Healing of mind, of body, of spirit. Elias had poured his resources into this place, but it was Lina's vision that guided its purpose. She wanted a haven where those who carried invisible burdens could rediscover themselves. and he wanted nothing more than to see that dream flourish. Children ran through the gardens, their laughter rising above the rustle of leaves. Some wore blindfolds, their small hands reaching for one another, as they played games Lina had designed. She called them scent matching, where children learned to identify herbs and flowers through smell alone, guided by touch and trust. The air was alive with the fragrance of lavender, rosemary, and roses, the sound of joy echoing through the grounds. Elias stood at the edge of the garden, watching with a smile that reached deeper than his healed eyes. He no longer carried the stiff, cold posture of the man who once believed power was his only shield. Now, he walked with an ease born of peace, a cane still occasionally in his hand not because he needed it, but as a reminder of where he had been. Each step reminded him that sight had been restored, but she was beside him now, her hand brushing his, her face radiant in the sunlight. Time had only deepened the quiet strength in her presence. She no longer moved like someone trying to hide her past or shrink from the world's judgment. She moved like a woman who knew her place, not in society's hierarchy, but in the hearts of those she healed. Elias squeezed her hand gently, grounding himself in the warmth of her touch. "Look at them," Lina whispered, her eyes scanning the children darting between the flower beds. "They don't see limits, they only see possibilities." Elias turned toward her, studying her profile, the light framing her hair. "Because you taught them that," he said softly, "just as you taught me." Her lips curved into a small, humble smile. "No, Elias, you taught yourself. I only reminded you to believe again." They began to walk along the path that wound through the retreat, passing rooms where adults practiced meditation with blindfolds, learning to focus on sound and breath. In another wing, art classes encouraged people to paint by touch, their fingers running through textured paints, creating pieces not defined by precision, but by feeling. Everywhere Elias looked, he saw lives opening like blossoms. As they reached the fountain at the center of the courtyard, Elias paused. He leaned against the stone edge, his gaze sweeping across the retreat. "Do you know," he said quietly, "there was a time when I thought my life ended with my sight. I believed everything I had built, everything I was, depended on what I could see. But now," he let the words trail off, his eyes finding hers, "now I realize sight was the smallest part of me. You helped me find everything else." Lina's eyes shimmered, but she shook her head gently. "You give me too much credit." "Enough," he countered, his voice low but certain. "You didn't just heal my eyes, Lina. You healed the man I had buried under pride, under fear, under the weight of what others expected. You helped me see everything that truly matters." A hush fell between them, filled only by the sound of the fountain and the laughter drifting on the breeze. For Elias, this was more than any boardroom triumph, more than any empire he could have ruled. This, Lina's hand in his, the garden blooming with hope, the sound of children's joy, was wealth no currency could measure. The afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the retreat, but the grounds remained alive with energy. Families gathered in the open hall for a meal prepared by volunteers, and the air buzzed with conversation. Elias and Lina moved through the crowd, greeted warmly by guests who spoke of newfound courage, of small but meaningful changes in their lives. Each story stitched itself into the fabric of what the retreat had become, a place where brokenness found restoration. Later, when the sun was almost gone, Elias led Lina back into the garden. The children had left, the herbs stood quiet in their beds, and the world seemed to hold its breath. He stopped beneath the old oak tree, the one that had stood as a silent witness since the retreat was. He turned to her then, his hand rising to cup her cheek. "Lina, when I close my eyes now, I don't see darkness anymore. I see you. Your voice, your touch, the way you sat with me in silence when I thought no one could reach me. That's my light." Her tears fell softly, her hand covering his. "And when I thought my past had ruined me," she whispered, "you reminded me that my gift was never a curse. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." For a long moment, they simply stood there, the silence between them as profound as any vow. Then Elias smiled, thin but full of conviction. "We'll keep building this together. Not an empire, but a sanctuary. For anyone who has been told they don't belong. For anyone who needs to remember that light isn't only in the eyes." She nodded, her smile breaking through her tears. "Together, she agreed. As twilight spread across the garden, children's laughter echoed faintly from the village beyond, and the first stars pricked the sky. Elias wrapped an arm around Lina, drawing her close as they walked back toward the retreat. The lights from within glowed warmly through the windows, not blinding or dazzling, but steady like the life they had chosen. At the threshold, Elias paused, looking back one last time at the garden, its roses catching the last of the light. He turned to Lina, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had lived in shadows and learned to see again. "You didn't just heal my eyes," he whispered. "You helped me see everything that truly matters." She pressed her forehead to his, and for the first time in years, Elias felt complete, not because his sight had returned, but because his vision of life, love, and meaning had been restored. Together, they stepped inside, their hands intertwined, as the retreat filled with the sound of voices, laughter, and the quiet promise of a future built on more than sight.